Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast. Hi everybody, good evening to you and yours from us at Teachers Talk Radio. This is The Late Show with me. I'm back after a couple of weeks out. It's really nice to be back on TTR. Hi to Nathan in the background. Hi to everybody who is listening back to this. Obviously, you might have clicked play on the recording. If you have, thank you very much indeed for joining us for this. And if you've just joined us listening live, so Ashley, Andrew, and anybody else who might be coming in to listen, welcome to you. This show is brought to you by John Catt Educational, who are leading providers and publishers of educational resources across the UK and across the world. If you want to check out the latest releases from John Catt, you can visit them at johncattbookshop.com, and you can benefit from 20% off using the code JCTTR2324 at checkout for 20% off anything. This evening's show, we are going to be focusing on two things. First segment is with Katie, and we are going to be talking about homeschooling. It's a really hot topic at the moment. Huge rise in homeschooling across the UK, and in fact, just across the world, really. It's certainly the Western world, in terms of the popularity of homeschooling. So I really want to dig into what homeschooling actually is, what people believe about homeschooling, and what we can learn from home education as well. They're the sort of things I wanted to dig into in part one. Part two of the show, which is going to kick off broadly around 8:15, I've got David, who is the head teacher of one of the schools within Astria Academies, and he, you may know, posted a picture of one of his techniques that he's introducing in the school around using clipboards to observe teaching and learning, or observe behaviours in the classroom, which is part of the sort of Teach Like a Champion repertoire. So I'll be talking to him in the second half of the show, hopefully, about that as well. So that's coming up later. Katie, I think you're here. Are you there? If you want to unmute on the bottom left of your screen.
Yep,
there you
we go.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you doing?
Excellent, not too bad. Well, first of all, do you want to introduce yourself and also just tell me a little bit about your story? Because I know you've been a home educator for 15 years, which is, well, it's a long time. So tell me about your story and tell me about that.
Yeah, so I've got 4 children. They're now almost 18, 17, 14 and 11. We've always home educated them. We kind of came to that decision as a plan A by the time the eldest was about just over a year old. So we've been around the home education world for a really long time. As part of that, I've run local groups. I've been involved in supporting on sort of local and national groups. So I've kind of seen it across all those years as things have grown and people have, more people have to it.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about that decision then, to homeschool. Why and how did that come about?
So originally I knew a few people, kind of a few years above us who were home educating, and that kind of, it seemed like an interesting idea. I really enjoyed spending time with my children. We'd already arranged our life so that I was able to do that full time. And I just didn't want to stop, basically. We looked around at the local schools when the time came, but we were already pretty sure by then that we just, I didn't want to give them away. I was enjoying looking after them. Anything that I could see that a school could offer was possible for us to arrange for ourselves, but we could do that in a way that suited them. Was able to work to their needs. And focus on what they wanted.
Well, I mean, obviously you don't have to go into this if you don't want to or whatever, but was there, I mean, from a practical and sort of financial point of view, was that a big consideration?
I mean, it was. It was sort of part of a whole lifestyle change that followed having children, which I didn't expect at all. I thought I was going to be back at work at 6 months and,
Yeah.
we'll find a good childminder and that would be it. But when they actually came along, turned out that wasn't what we wanted to do. We were living in London at the time, so we moved out of London and sort of as part of that arranged things so that we could, survive on one income.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah.
So did you mention you had 3 children? Is that right?
4.
4 children, right? So at the beginning of that process, at what age did you start the home education?
I mean, because we'd thought about it from such an early age, there wasn't really a step change. It was just a continuation of what we had already done. We part of what we wanted from home education was that level of flexibility. So we were very informal and play based when they were a lot younger.
Yeah, right.
Obviously, as they get older and they want, their sorts of plans and interests, we're going to lead them towards GCSEs. So we moved into that from the time they were kind of 12-ish, and sort of the younger ones got structured a little bit earlier on because they had to fit in with the way the family was working for the older ones.
Got
But
you.
it's
So as they got a bit older, because obviously you mentioned there was an informality at the beginning. It was play centered and so on. As they got a bit older, did you introduce some of the things that a school would introduce? Did you introduce stuff like a timetable, or like, how did you structure their days?
so we did get to that point. As I said, it wasn't a big step change. It was sort of a gradual increase in things that we needed to do. And obviously, with 4 children in different stages, at one point, there was 9 GCSEs between 2 of them going on in a year. There was 2 younger children. Some families will keep it a lot more flexible. It just wasn't going to work for us at that time. But it was very much, this is what you need to get done on these days. So long as that happens, it's not particularly, we're not 9 o'clock, you must be sitting here, 10 o'clock, you then move on to that. This is what needs to get done. Let's figure out
Yeah.
how to do it.
So, I mean, one of the questions that I sort of asked is, when you sort of set off on this journey, there's a lot of people out there who would be, I guess, concerned about the socialization element, right? For
Yeah.
home educated children.
I mean,
Um,
that's always kind of the big challenge, is that, if only they had friends, how are they going to do that? And it really isn't like that, because again, particularly if you've done it from the start, you seek those out. It's a different style of socializing. So, we will go and they'll spend an entire day free to socialize with a big group of friends that some of them they've known since birth. It's a real nice group. I've got more kids come along to my home ed group that I run than go to some of our local schools. It's actually, there's quite a big social scene there.
yeah, yeah,
And also the other side of that, when you're looking at, not everybody chooses it from the start like we did. If they've come out later on, the school isn't actually that great a social experience for everybody. So you're not necessarily comparing it to the
no,
child who really gets on at school is hanging out with their mates.
no, but
That isn't how it is for
undoubtedly,
everyone.
no, I completely understand that, but undoubtedly, when you think of let's say, I mean, it might be slightly different with primary, but imagine the average secondary school, you might have, I don't know, 800, 1,000 students in there, right? So you are getting a huge range, potentially a huge range of backgrounds and sort of outlooks and all the rest of it, right? From that huge cohort of people, of students. So, I guess what someone might ask is, does it sort of bubble them a little bit, if that makes sense? I'm trying to put it in a better way, but does it, are they more limited in how, yes, it comes back, I guess, to socialization, but it's not as simple as that, is it? Because they're still socializing, as you've just said, with friends, with groups of other children, whatever, right? I get all that, but just in terms of access to children who are from a huge range of sort of backgrounds and everything else, what about that side of it?
To be honest, that again is actually, it's far more diverse within the home educating community
Yeah.
than you would think, because again, people have come to it for a lot of different reasons, and across all
Yeah.
of the range. And again,
Yeah.
probably my kids have had a wider experience than they would have in our local rural school just for us. So you do, and because it's a smaller community, you tend to have to get on with everybody, with whoever is there, because it depends on the area. Obviously, if you really, really wanted to pick and choose a particular social group, you could, and you could probably do that more easily in the same way as you could if you choose, a grammar school or an independent school.
Yeah. Because
There's
I mean, I
always
was going
those
to
options.
say, that my sort of idea there was of your, very broad sweep comprehensive school, that sort of thing. I mean, in some sort of independent schools, it would be very sort of, probably streamlined anyway in that sense.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know that because I've never been to an independent school, but I would imagine that it would be.
oh no, yeah, same here, I guess.
Yeah. So I did a poll which you've seen on my X
Hmm.
account, and I asked people, do you overall believe that the huge growth in homeschooling is a good or bad thing? Now, I'll be honest, the results surprised me of that because for me, I am on the neither good or nor bad. For me, it would just depend on. I don't see it as an inherently good or bad thing. I just see it as a thing, right?
Mm.
That's how I approach it anyway, personally. Um, and I think that there will be some pros and cons to it from a and I was asking people from an overall perspective. I wasn't saying, is it good for teachers, is it good for students, is it good for families, and so on. It was just asking everybody overall what they think, and I think it's on 62 or 63% bad. did
Mm.
did that result surprise you? Like, how do you, or is that something that you would have predicted?
I would probably have predicted that. Yes, it doesn't surprise me from the overall point of view, and I don't
Oh, it did for me.
think that's right, but I think that is quite a prevalent attitude, that actually home education is a bit of a scary thing. Um, I don't quite understand why that. I mean, I
Mm.
understand people thinking it's a bad idea that children are coming out of school when they don't really want to. So when they, and from that point of view, yes,
Yeah.
it's bad that happens, but it's good that they have an option, that there is an alternative.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the full results were good thing 9.8%, bad thing 62.9%, neither good nor bad 20.2%, no opinion 7.1%. I mean, some of the replies were interesting in the sense
Mm.
of, they were quite sort of, um, I guess, sort of, you had the full range of reasons pro and con in the replies. You had Mr. Brown who said it's good because schools often can't provide the flexibility or management that the children need. He said that. Ray said, as a head of year, I saw countless safeguarding referrals that would never have been caught if children were kept cloistered by their abusers. Not all families are safe. Schools help protect young people. What do you think of that one? Is that something that does that make you, because obviously you have done homeschooling for 15 years, you've
Mm.
obviously done it very successfully, you've obviously met a lot of other home educators, but does that side of it come into it, the safeguarding side? And
I mean, it's sort of the big fear, I think, isn't it? That people are
mm,
worried that it's, parents are doing this for an abusive reason. Um, and if you sort of look at the statistics and things, there's no particular evidence that there's any more chance of someone being, abused within home education than without. Um, and to me, I think it's no different really to the position of a preschool child. Safeguarding, of course, it's a concern. Not every single parent has the best interests of their child
yeah.
at heart, whether they mean to or not. So it is, you need to have ways to react to concerns where they arise. But I don't think you need to automatically be concerned just because a parent has decided that they're going to do this part of education themselves, any more than if you've got a 2-year-old that doesn't go to nursery full time. You need to be more concerned about them just because of that.
One thing I want to get into a little bit is curriculum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's been a lot of debate, obviously, in the last few years about curriculum and sort of, particularly along the lines of, I guess, there's also been debates around impartiality in schools as well,
Yeah.
and in terms of the way children teach, and also which subjects are selected within a curriculum, right? So, as a home educator, were you aware, very sort of aware of that in the way? Because it's interesting, isn't it? Because like, you know, sort of you want to let children work it out themselves a little bit, don't you? But equally, like, how difficult is that to keep your own biases in check, if you know what I mean, in a home environment? If that's
Yeah.
important or not, I don't know. Maybe that's not important.
And I mean, it's a balance that every family has. Obviously, there's going to be things that you as a family are just more familiar with and happen to have in your life anyway. I mean, we're
Yeah,
sort of more on the maths and sciencey things, so that's the sort of things that we have around and are interested in. Um, for some families that might be more arts, that might be more, languages. Languages is a thing that as a family we've, not really had. We've had to go out to other sources for that. So you have to, as a family, be aware of what experiences your children might like that they're not going to automatically get. And again, that's something that actually does come out of home ed groups, because they'll see their friends and maybe their friends will be interested in something that they're not, and they'll bring that in to you, and you can sort of see that and go, right, okay, so perhaps we need to feed this a bit and find some other, ways of getting that in front of them so that they do have that wide experience.
yeah, because that's an interesting point in the sense of, I guess, that sort of diversity of opinions and perspectives, and yes, I guess expertise, which was going to be my next question in terms of,
Mm.
the gaps in your own knowledge or the gaps in your own expertise, and also, I don't know what your actual sort of job is, Katie, because I haven't asked you that. Apart from obviously being a home educator, before being a home educator, what you were doing, but is there that sort of thing of, be, I can't have enough knowledge of everything to do it.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
what I would think, if you know what I mean. I'd be like, I can't do this. Like, I don't know. I can't do it.
but what you,
I don't know how you did it.
yeah, well, I mean, what you don't do is you're not sitting at front, at the front of the table of your kids explaining it to them. You're finding the resources that they need. And even in the subject, I was actually a software engineer, so, and I did a
Right.
maths degree, so kind of like maths, I could
Right.
in theoretically do that, but I don't. I
Yes.
give them a textbook, I find them a program, and I'm there to answer the questions. And if there's a bit stuck on, I say, well, okay, let's go and investigate. We'll go and look it up. We'll see if we find out to that. And again, we have been in a position where, when it comes to GCSEs, in some areas, we've got in online classes. So I would tend to do that. I think for English and history, I've usually done that. But for pretty much everything else, we've been able to do it, through textbooks, through resources. It's finding those things, and then you're providing the scaffolding of making sure they're doing it, making sure they're engaging, helping them if they do get stuck. Providing that support and mentoring, but not sitting there teaching 15 subjects.
Yeah, but I mean, do you find, because obviously it sounds from what you said that that's more, I guess, a facilitating approach a little bit more in at home than, presumably you would rarely sit the children down and actually sort of, you know have a board and sort of teach at them,
Yeah,
if you know what
yeah.
I
I
mean.
don't I don't do that. What I think the closest I come is we have something I call morning time, and that's reading stories to them. So I will read stuff out. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not planning on teaching a lesson to the children. I'm
So how
planning
do
on
you
helping them out.
how do you assess them then? So, do you assess them, or do you just say, you know, do I think they know this as their parent? Because obviously that's a very different thing than as their teacher, because you know them really well. I mean, do you assess them all the time?
Not at all until
Yeah, really.
late stages of GCSE. I mean, I assess in that they're my children. I spend time with them,
Yeah.
and I'm like, are they learning? Are they growing? I've never tried to follow a national curriculum. As I said, we were very much play based throughout primary ages at least, but it's always been about, are they interested? Are they engaging in things? Do they have, something that they're working towards, and how can I help with that? It doesn't, at least, up until we get to that curriculum stage of GCSEs where you have to follow what's on the spec, or what's in the textbook, and check that they do know that stuff. Up until then, I don't care that much precisely what they're doing, so long as it's something they're interested in and engaged in and working towards, that they can see that what they put in has a result and gets them where they want to go. That's kind of my key aim.
Got you. Do the kids ever? Do your kids ever go, Mum, we're fed up of seeing you now? Be blunt. Like, do they ever just go, you've been everything to us, and I'm sure you've done an amazing job. So this isn't a slight on you, but I'm just thinking of me now. As a child, it probably would have been like, I don't know how I would have seen it.
Well,
I guess if you grow up with it, it's different, isn't it? If you've grown up from a very early age, but were there ever points where they were like, we want to go to school?
not exactly. At the point of secondary school, particularly with my eldest, because secondary school, it seemed a bit scarier, and I knew that was a good transition point. If they were ever going to go into school, that would be a good time. So we did go around and visit a couple of the local schools, sort of with her, and say, look,
Yeah,
is this something that you're interested in? There's pros, there's cons. What we do at home now, or have a bit of an idea of what happens at school.
yeah,
Would you like to do? It wasn't completely and utterly you decide. It would have been, a conversation, but I wanted her to know what was available, whether that was something she wanted. And the main thing that
yeah,
came out of that was she did quite like that idea of peer learning. She didn't really want to do it all of the time. And so that's when we first started looking for, an online class, which she didn't do for till she was sort of 13.
got
But
you,
then that
got you.
gave her
So
that kind of bit of a peer
yeah,
experience, a bit of, input from somebody else. So, you know, at that sort of teenage, late secondary stage, they do maybe one or two a week, subjects that they were doing through an online class. And then that just gave them a little bit of difference, a bit more exposure. And we've always made sure that, we're going out, we're seeing their friends, we're having social groups. Often that's involved me starting a social group for them to, for other people to come along to. Because that is important. You need variety, basically.
do you think that I mean, just coming back, I sort of touched on this earlier, but that sort of the idea. So when someone is at home, and I use the word someone, not just children, I'm talking like anybody, right? You're at home. It's a very comfortable environment, isn't it, for you?
Mm.
Well, it should. You would hope it would be. It might not be, but you know, you would hope it's going to be what the place where you feel most comfortable, right?
Yeah.
You're aiming for that to be at home. So one of my questions slash concerns, if you like, would be: is a certain level of discomfort a good thing for children to experience based on what's going to happen after they're 18 years old? But
Yeah.
the counter argument to that, of course, would be, well, actually, the world's changed. So a lot of people, you can work at home now, right? So there is that sort of idea that, well, hang on, the world has changed. But how would you respond to that element of, it's almost like school can present you situations that you may face later on that in a home environment you just wouldn't face.
So, and I think that is part of knowing your child. And as I said, that bit where you want to see them growing, you want to see them engaging, and part of that is stepping a bit outside the comfort zone. What that is going to be different for every child. I mean, within the home education community, it's overrepresented in children with varying different levels of neurodiversity and needs. So for them, what might be stretching them out of their comfort zone might be different to my kids, but you can find those experiences and you can bring those in. I mean, mine have done martial arts, they've done music, They've
Yeah.
performed in
Yeah.
concerts, they've had
Yeah.
competitions. All of those things are available. It's
Yeah.
just
I,
it's that getting that balance of what you encourage them into.
that's the thing, because I don't know, because my school that I went to, it was a state school. It was a normal state school, but it was pretty strict. Like, it was quite. I remember it was all the sort of typical things you'd think, like, but in the 90s, right? It was like getting bawled at and getting sort of, yeah, it was traditional. I guess traditional for now. In the 90s, it was probably completely normal, right? But I don't know whether those experiences were good for me or not as an adult. I don't know. But I don't know, like, without those experiences, I don't know. Like, I don't know what the impact of not having those experiences would have been, because obviously I had them. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
and I don't think
Yeah.
anyone does. I mean, you can't know what you would have been like had you done something else. And that goes for whether you pick this primary school or the one at the other side of town as much as it does whether you home educate or not. In fact, my
Yeah.
eldest did. I asked her whether she thought home education was a good idea, whether she'd enjoyed it, whether she'd do it, and she goes, "Well, I don't know. It's what
Yeah.
happened. It's all I know.
Yeah.
So it's
Exactly.
fine."
It's, it's
Yeah.
it's what they know. Yeah. How does the concept of competition and achievement differ in a home education setting versus a school environment?
Well, I think it gives you the opportunity to tailor that to your children. I mean, even obviously, I've got 4 children. That's quite a small sample size, but they are all very, very different in terms of what they're interested in, what motivates them. One of them is pretty competitive. She'll seek out a lot of competitive opportunities. Another one has just got zero interest in that whatsoever. She just doesn't want to. She will drive herself along her own path, the things that she wants to do, but she's got no interest in where she is compared to somebody else. And school sort of it it is very much competitive. One thing also we see, among the home education groups is there's just very little jockeying for position.
Mm.
And in school, because
Yeah.
everybody is doing the same academic things at the same time, whether you want to or not, whether you're encouraging that or not, everyone knows where they stand in relation to the rest of the class. They
Yeah.
know if they're
Especially
the
if the
kid who gets it
sets.
easily. They know if they're the kid who doesn't. Whether it's however much you try to support that, they know, the other kids know,
Yeah.
and that becomes a thing, which it just doesn't really within home education, because that's just not what everybody is thinking about. They're just thinking about how they're going to hang out and get on together at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And you're absolutely right. I mean, my experience is that, I mean, I knew I was in like the bottom set for maths, right? Um, Out of, like, I don't know, 6 sets or something ridiculous, which is hilarious because my mum was a maths teacher, so it's utterly hilarious. But yeah, so there is, and even in the mixed groups, there is, yeah, there is inherent competition. Again, you could ask, well, is that life? Is that emulating life? I don't know. Like, how old's your eldest now?
She's almost 18, so she's off to
Okay,
university in September. And
yeah,
they've moved into sixth form at that sort of 16. For us, that kind of feels like the right age to move on to
yeah.
that state system. So my oldest 2 are now at sixth form.
Ah, I see. Right, so they've gone to college. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And how have they adapted to that?
Yeah, really well. They're
Yeah, just
Yeah.
sort of seamless, normal transition. Because it is a
Yeah,
big change, isn't it? It's like a massive change. College is different to school, granted, but still a big change. Really big change.
yeah, absolutely. And so they had classes and homework, and again, one of the things that we looked for was that experience. I didn't want it to be taking over their entire life, but I did want them to have the experience of another teacher, of having work that they had to get done by a certain time. So they'd had that 1 or 2 subjects a year that had been that
Mm.
bit structured. But yeah, I mean, again, they're both very different kids, so they've approached it in their own different ways, but they've both got on really well.
And in terms of, like, one of the questions I've always wondered is, as well, is what about time management and efficiency? I mean, when I was a teenager, I could have literally slept till 2 in the afternoon every day, quite happily, and then gone to bed at like 3 a.m. Um, no, in fact, I just get up at 2 and then go to bed at probably like 11. I just love sleeping, right, all the time. So there's no way. I mean, that would have been the first thing for me of like, I'm not getting up at 7 o'clock for school anymore. I just don't want
Well,
to.
and again, there's lots of different ways of arranging it depending on what your kid needs, what the family setup is. But there's no real reason why you have to get up at 7 in the morning other than to get to school.
No, there
So,
isn't. I
like,
mean, you're
again,
absolutely right.
we've gone on. This is roughly what we want to get done. As long as that gets done and everybody's happy and it's working out, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. Again, that sort of reflects the world of work and the way that's changing in the sense
Mm.
of, if you're working remotely, for example, if you have a remote role, fully remote role, the the company or the business might say, right, we've got all this to get through. You can basically choose your hours that you do
Yeah,
it in, more or less. You can clock in, clock out, and all the rest of it, and it's flexible working, right?
yeah, exactly. So
Um,
you, as
yeah.
adults, you choose that sort of environment. You choose whether that flexibility is important to you. You choose whether working with other people is important to you. You have some of that capability, and nobody gets to choose precisely what they want to do. That's there's always boundaries, but you do get
Yeah.
to control it and to shift it and decide what things are important to you. So it's just kind of extending that within children. And as parents, you have the role to make sure that that's not going too far, but
Mm.
that's just part of parenting, isn't it? As
And
what's
if
the healthy
so, is
point for my children?
it's okay. We're coming towards the end now. Still got a couple of questions. In terms of regulation for you, was
Mm.
what was there any, or was it a case of I'm just going to sort of self-evaluate here whether I'm doing a good job or not? Do you know what I mean? Like, was
So,
there any
I mean,
regulation?
for us, because we've never been to school and we're very well known locally, but no one ever had any concerns that they raised. So we actually didn't have any contact from anybody from the LA up until a couple of years ago when I volunteered as a school governor. So that kind of brought me brought me to their attention. But up until then, it was just my job as is parenting to check that my children were doing all right. And I think what we've seen in England is that there's been more and more involvement from local authorities. So if you've deregistered, the local authority should get notified. If anyone raises any concerns, the local authority will get notified, and then they will contact you, usually sort of once a year, um, and they'll ask some questions about what it is that you're doing. So the legal responsibility sits with the parent. It's the parent's job to educate their child, but there are sort of checks and balances, the same way as there are with any other duties that can kick in. If you think that might not be happening, then there's actions they can take you know, to start either guiding you towards that or eventually to say, look, no, they need to go to school because you're not providing a suitable education, and that's what you've got to do.
Yeah. Do you think that homeschooling? Just before I ask this question, because
Mm-hmm.
it's one of my last ones, just want to give a big shout out to everyone listening live. Nathan, Tom, Catherine, California, I call her, Lucy, Dale, Paul, Mr. E Primary, Alex, Let's Logic, IC, Kat, Ashley, Nils, Amy, and Michael. Thank you very much, and of course everybody else who's been sort of dropping in and out of the sessions. It's been a really good conversation. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was, do you think home education is the preserve of the affluent, in the sense that the world is rapidly changing, and when I think about things like PE, for example, and I know what your answer is going to be, sports centres. I can almost anticipate this straight away. We took him to the Etihad for a training session or something. But do you think there is that element of you have to be relatively affluent to do it well?
I mean, actually, no, I really don't think it is. I think what you need is time. I mean, money always helps. I'm not going to deny that money gives you options. That does in any frame of life.
Yeah.
But what you need is time. Often giving up that time means you have less money. So home educators are, on the whole, tend to be more on the skint side because they're not able to do that full-time working. And so
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
you know, you look for the full-time resources when your main resource is you as a parent and the things that you can find. And you know, there's libraries, there's internet, a lot of that is available, and there's other people, you know, PE, like at the home ed group, they'll spend a couple of hours playing capture the flag, you know, 20 teenagers running around, and
Yeah.
that's exercise. And they're
Yeah.
obviously, and then you focus in on the things that are important to your child. So as I said, we pick, you know, one or two things that we can't do in a free way and are important to them,
Do you think
and focus your funds there.
do you ever think, what if my child missed out on that inspiring teacher? The one who people always say, that's the teacher who got me into X, Y, Z. Do you ever think I, as home educator in this more facilitating role, might not have been able to, well, you're one person at the end of the day, right? So it's
And
like there's a
that's,
limit
yeah,
to, yeah.
but that's where bringing in, you know, other experiences, it doesn't, you know, again, within a school there's a limited number of people and teachers that you're exposed to. It's still a fixed amount, it's still a bit random whether it happens to be the one that, you know, you interact with. So kind of an example from us, we always go to the local library a lot, and just one summer they had a storyteller in, and my kids really engaged with that. They like stood up and joined in. And a little while later we went to the library and they said, oh, that storyteller has told me about this competition in, you know, Llandudno, kind of an hour away, and they could take part. And so they got into that and they decided they wanted to, and they went off to and they stood up on the stage. You know, they told their story, the storytelling competition. They got a prize because everybody got a prize, and you know, they loved it. And as part of that, there were some free workshops, and they saw someone playing the harp. We were in Wales,
Mm,
and then one of them decided she wanted to learn the harp, and so I
yeah.
kind of, you know, went out searching for that. So those sparks of inspiration, you know, they're all around. They're in the world, and you can get them,
Yeah.
you know, in all sorts of different ways.
No, I think so. I mean, I was more thinking of that sort of relationship, that that sort of teacher-student relationship that can build into something that then inspires someone to do something. If you know what I mean, like it's slightly different, because that's like me going. Let's say I go to. Well, I was going to say Goodison Park there, Katie, but that would have been a massive mistake. If I went to Anfield, you know, and got inspired to be a footballer because I saw those players playing, and I'm an Everton fan, so I've just insulted my own club, but it doesn't matter. But I probably would. I did text my dad earlier and say I wish you hadn't made me an Everton fan, but that's a different matter altogether. But let's imagine I went to football, watched the game of football, got inspired to be a footballer. That's slightly different than a teacher building a relationship with me, which then nurtured me into a particular pathway.
Yeah, and you know, again, there are lots of different ways that that mentor relationship happens, and that doesn't always happen in school. I mean, I broadly enjoyed school. I can remember a few teachers and a few moments, but there wasn't. I didn't have that throughout my entire time at primary or secondary school. I don't think. You know,
No,
it
no.
doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's and you know, we've got a friend had that relationship with, you know, someone next door who's got a carpentry workshop, and they're really into that, and they've, you know, developed that mentorship over time in that way. Or there's, you know, we've been involved in the community woodland. There's those sorts of
Yeah, for sure.
opportunities and relationships are there too.
Katie, it's been fascinating sort of talking to you. I feel like, listen, we'll have to do this again maybe in 10 years when your eldest is like 27. We'll have to do like a review show. I'll get them on here. No, it's really fascinating to find out a little bit more. I could have talked to you a lot longer about it. So thank you very much. And obviously, everybody, if you are sort of listening live, then definitely give Katie a follow. She's at KTF1978 on X. So yeah, thank you, Katie, and yeah, speak to you soon.
Yeah,
We are
thanks a lot. It's
now.
been great to talk to you.
Cheers, Katie. Bye. We have now got David coming on. Just before I introduce David, big shout out to our sponsors on the show this evening, John Catt Educational. If you are a reader of educational stuff, then look no further than John Catt. Go to johncattbookshop.com. Have a look at their new releases, and anything that tickles your fancy, you can get 20% off it by using the code JCTTR2324. That includes if you're a head teacher like David, buy all your staff a book, right? Get yourself a 20% discount off it. Now, David,
Yes.
I welcome. How are you?
Yeah, all right, actually, to be honest. Not so bad. Nice to be on here, Tom.
Well, thank you very much for giving up the time to come on, especially at such short notice. Because I don't know whether to call you Mr. Clipboard Scales, because you have become slightly synonymous with your picture of a pink clipboard. So I wondered, to begin with, David, which is the inevitable question: what do you think of the whole? What brought all that together for you? Tell me about it. Tell me the story of the clipboards.
Yeah, so I mean, we're a TLAC school, so Teach Like a Champion, that I'm sure many of your listeners will know about. And we do something called active obs. So we walk around the classroom, we hunt for misconceptions, hunt for misunderstandings, and we write them on the clipboard. It's quite simple, really. It's nothing spectacular. People have been doing it for many years under Teach Like a Champion. Obviously, it's got a certain branding. All I did was post a picture of our £1.49 generic pink, shocking pink, should I say, clipboards online. And next thing you know, people are saying I'm sponsored by Doug Limov. Are the microchips inside the clipboards? I can tell you there are not. Doug Limov didn't sponsor them. In fact, I ended up getting an apologetic message from Doug Limov, who said he was sorry for all of the fuss. But all I was doing was just showing off a £1.49 clipboard online. But that's Twitter for you, isn't it, Tom?
Do you think that, like, a lot of the sort of commentary that I saw, I did understand the element of sort of, I guess there were a lot of people saying it's gimmickry, and it's just sort of, they were saying it's literally just what teachers in a way have always done, like observing the students learning, right, and sort of remembering, like I say, remembering it's happening in the moment. But it's almost like the criticism was, one of the criticisms was, why do I codify, why do I need to record everything that I'm doing? Does it, I guess my question would be is, the critics would ask, does that take the joy and spontaneity out of things?
Not for me, and not for our staff either, really. I mean, I found it quite funny. There was one member of Twitter who posted a picture of a pad of paper and a pen, and said, "How about you just use these?" Well, if you're trying to walk around a classroom with a pad of paper and nothing to lean on, it's quite hard to read your own writing, and mine's quite hard to read at the best of times anyway. I guess the caricature of schools like ours is that you can't be yourself. Everyone's an automaton or robot. And nothing couldn't be further from the truth. When I was teaching in the same school, I was a very different character from the person in the next classroom down the row. What we want is passion, energy, a love of teaching children, a love of your subject, and we want people's personalities to shine through. But what really helps is if your employer doesn't just leave you to your own devices. And, if there is an active ops strategy, then you have a clipboard that you're not having to pay from your own pocket. Just so happens our house colour's pink, which offends some people, it seems to be.
What's the, I mean, how have the staff are the staff buying into this? Are they on board?
Well, I'm not a head teacher who stays in my office, really. I tend to be out seeing lessons, dealing with issues as they arise on the corridors. And every lesson you see, there's a shocking pink clipboard either on the desk or with them as they walk around. That's not to say that active obs is the only strategy you can use to check for understanding. There are lots of other ways to do that, whether that's the fantastic mini whiteboard, or whether that's just asking a question, or whether that's a call and response, or any other different type of strategy. But if you are wanting to make notes as you walk around, or record merits, demerits, or if you're wanting to write down misconceptions people have, it's just a really good way of keeping track of it so you can do something about it. But it's not every time, it's not all the time.
Okay, so let's yeah. I mean, as I say, we've sort of been through the sort of critique of that, and you've mentioned some of it as well. I guess I think one of the criticisms I've seen online was it's, and I've seen this before, to be fair, in various different means, is like this is teaching repackaged. It's something that's always happened that's been repackaged into a strategy, and then people sort of then get frustrated or whatever because of that, or yeah, that I would say was the key sort of criticism online that I saw there. But I wanted to ask you about TLAC wider strategies as well, because I talked in the past, I've done many infamous shows actually about slant. Um, and I wondered, do you use slant? Is that one of the things you use?
Yeah, so that's our way of getting quiet in the classroom. I've been in schools where it's a hand up, or you see sort of people where they're left to fend themselves, and there's variants of shh and 3-2-1. But 3-2-1 slant's what we use, yeah, and it works because it's a house style and because we teach how to use it, and there's not been any backlash for us, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, one of the things that I sort of pitched to, well, to various guests that I've had about slant is that it's been criticised in some quarters by people who believe that it is not an inclusive strategy when it comes to neurodivergent learners who can't do certain things that would be involved in slant. So I'm wondering what reasonable adjustments do you make when it comes to slant, if any, or do you feel that you don't really need to?
Yeah, it's an interesting one and quite current, isn't it? A lot of people are sort of there's a bit of a backlash against some of those strategies. But what I'd say is that we're a 22% SEN school. And for what it's worth, we're a 50% free school meal school. And actually, it's the neurodivergent children and the most vulnerable who often say that this is a good thing because they know where they stand. You are saying, I want you to sit up, I want you to listen, I don't want you to have anything in your hands, and I want you to look at me. And you're saying it in one word rather than many. And that clarity is something that many neurodivergent students really do value. Now, of course, that's not going to be for everyone. I think if there was a disability, we'd certainly make adjustments for something like that if it wasn't possible to do it. And if somebody did have a struggle with something like that, then we'd make reasonable adjustments, allowances. But that tends to be few and far between because the school that we've designed and the school that many others following a similar model have done is they've worked around the most vulnerable student and the student who has the most difficulties accessing learning. And if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for the whole school and it can work for everyone. And it simplifies school activities. So it's easier for teachers, it's easier for students, and that means that everyone can succeed. And that's certainly my experience of it.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, it's a very sort of, there's a big divide, isn't there, in terms of what people think about it. Do you think that from a teacher perspective, do you require the teachers to use slant? Do you say to them, look, these are the techniques we expect you to use in every lesson?
Yeah, because if you don't do that, the problem without having a house style is everyone gets confused. And your limited time for staff CPD is ill focused because somebody might be running a hands up policy, somebody might be running a slant policy, somebody might be running a different policy. And the people that lose out in that chaos are the children. And you mentioned their neurodivergence. They're expecting to see the same set of routines in the classroom to feel safe, to understand what's expected of them, to avoid getting in trouble, to know how to be successful, all of these different things. So it's actually reducing anxiety, it's increasing clarity, but it's also meaning that you don't have to explain in a teaching staff of 50 different rule sets. So it's actually just saving everybody time and it's reducing anxiety and it's improving the effectiveness of the school. That's the benefit of a house style, and slant is just one of those elements of a house style that we have.
Well, tell us, I mean, because that for me, Just thinking about it, I probably would struggle to not be a little bit too freelance, let's say, with my, with my ways. I think that, you know, um, I think there's a lot of teachers out there who might be, a little bit more eccentric, or who might be a little bit more sort of freelancy, let's say, about their ways. And does it? I guess the critics would say, does that sort of drown out the creativity of of an individual teacher? As in, like, I don't. There might be some teachers who say, I don't need to use this technique or that technique, because I don't need to. I've got a level of, if you like, control in the classroom. I'm managing the classroom in a way where I personally don't need or see value in these strategies, but I have to use them because, as you say, of the house style. I mean, are you basically saying, I'm saying we'll sacrifice that for the greater good in your view?
I don't think you have to sacrifice personality at all. I think that structure is freeing and enabling, because by not having to focus on exactly how you're going to get quiet, just knowing that that will work, because it works everywhere in school, means that you can show exactly that personality, and you can use that subject knowledge you have. You can show the passion you have for your subject, the passion you have for working with young people, and you can be quirky and eccentric. I can see some of our teachers are listening, and I know that they're very, very different personalities, whether that's our Teach First Year 2 English teacher, who's very, very quirky and has a wonderfully wry sense of humour, or whether that's our Vice Principal, Julie, who I can see is listening now. And you can see that real passion for drama just shining through, but that absolute structure so children feel safe and secure. You get all of that from having that structure, but without it. And I don't know if you've worked in any of these schools, Tom.
I've worked in one that I would say
Yeah.
was a school that adopted many of those strategies, but only in the short term, only for a period of perhaps 3 months.
Right.
And the fact I wasn't a permanent full-time member of staff there meant that, probably it was obvious that I wasn't going to be there after the end of that contract, if that makes sense. So I didn't have to buy in to XYZ, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I've also worked in schools that are very, very different. Everyone pulls in different directions, and it's hard, draining work, because you're fighting against a tide where everyone does their own thing. Nobody's mutually supportive. But we have supply teachers who come and teach at our school, and they actually want to stay because it's so ordered, it's so easy to understand, it's just so much common sense. Simplicity rules, because when everything is simple, you can focus on the complex stuff that you're trying to teach, but it allows you to be yourself, and that's a real misconception that sometimes people get with this type of school.
No, absolutely. I mean, in terms of sort of, I know Doug's here as well, Doug Lamov. So welcome, Doug, because we're sort of
And Doug,
talking
and
about.
thanks for the kind message about the clipboards, Doug. It was my fault, not yours.
But I wanted to ask about the other elements of the thing, because you mentioned that's one part of the house style. The using slang, for example, is one.
Mm.
What are the other things in there, in that toolkit, that you would expect teachers to use or to display?
Yeah. So, firstly, I guess a feature of our school would be that we have booklets. Some listeners today might have seen pictures of our very large printer, which means we can print these on in-house. But that just reduces all of that cutting, sticking, how many glue sticks are working today, where are the glue sticks? Everything is in a booklet. The booklet's decided by the group, by the department, and from next year, the wider subject team. So it means you can decide what should be taught and what things aren't going to be taught. We can prioritise reading, which is going to make a big difference. I think that's something that a lot of people coming to our school would see and might find unusual. But the other thing to say about that is that there's other TLAC techniques that have been really beneficial to us, whether that's and it's all simple stuff, Tom. You see, it's not. People would always criticise it as reinventing the wheel, or it's always been done. Absolutely, because teaching has been good for a very long time, using very basic techniques, using questioning, whether that's all hands up questioning, or whether that's a cold call, a call and response, whether that's circulating a classroom or working the clock and saying you've got 30 seconds left, 20 seconds to go, let's make sure that we finish. All of these techniques are just simple, teach like a champion techniques. And what I think Doug has done a fantastic job of is just writing this down in a very, very simple way that enables it to be really well understood. And it's just common sense, but really well written, really cohesive common sense that put together just help you be a really good teacher. So that's why we buy into it. And I haven't done that thing where, you take Kagan structures and call them collaborative learning structures or anything like that. It is Doug's work, and we're really pleased to be able to do the best we can with it.
In terms of, I wanted to ask you about your school, actually, because your school, and I've seen the video that you've posted on your Twitter account there of, I think it was a BBC sort of visit. I don't know what it was, but I watched it anyway. And in that video you sort of detail the story, if you like, of your school. Now, how long have you been there for?
Well, I joined in January last year, and then in March of last year I became principal, taking my first headship. So
how did that feel then? Because this school, I'm sure you won't mind me saying, is, well, it sounds quite tough to me. To be absolutely honest with you, David, it has a feel about it that sort of says to me, this could be, a bit of a sort of baptism of fire, so to speak. So, were you nervous about that? Or is that something you relish? Do you wake up and go, come on, boys and girls?
Oh, I'm really passionate about working in challenging schools. So I did teach first back in the old days, what it seems to be now. And I made that commitment to address educational disadvantage. And myself from Teesside, and just went to the local comprehensive. I went to the local sixth form.
And you sound like a politician now, David. You're not standing for election, are you?
I am not.
Don't worry, you don't need to prove your working class credentials to me.
I wouldn't say working class, Tom, but certainly went to a normal school and just did quite well at it. Now, if you think that you've got something to give education, you give it to those that need it most. And when I worked in challenging schools, I just found very similar problems with all of those challenging schools. The biggest single problem was behaviour. That was the thing holding them back. And if it wasn't behaviour, it was leadership. And if it was leadership, that's probably why there was bad behaviour. That was my experience of challenging schools, whether that was whole school riots in one school, whether it was just regularised staff assaults or fights or inappropriate children behaviour or disruption. All of those things were common features. And I have to tell you, when I started at Woodfield, I knew the school had a reputation. I was apprehensive. I think that the majority of people told me that I was making a mistake and I shouldn't take it on. But I've really fallen in love with the place because it just needed work. It was a difficult place to work. I had my ribs fractured by a child in the first couple of months. Staff assault was quite regular. Children would just push and shove. You see that in the Look North video. And everything I've done with the team has just been pure common sense. We have a uniform policy. How about we enforce that one? They're struggling to pay for it. How about we help them financially with the uniform? Perhaps they should walk on the left to avoid them bashing into one another. Perhaps we should enforce rules around meal times or increase structures or have queuing or put lines on the floor. Like all of these things, when you're an outsider, might seem like control freakery or a maniacal want for adult authority and control. But I can tell you that chaos isn't very nice either. And the most vulnerable are the ones that suffer, and the ones that win in chaos are the vagabonds and the rogues. They're the ones that win.
Let me ask you a couple of questions on that, though. The first one would be, and obviously you can't really answer this in a way, but one of my very cynical things that I always think, because I have a very cynical mind, which is probably a bad thing, but I always think it's easier to sell a story about a school than the actual reality of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not suggesting by any means, David, that you are doing that, but I am saying that how do you know that you are changing things in a real and substantial way? As in, how do you really know that?
I think there's lots of ways of measuring it. There's lots of anecdotal information, and we've had lots of visitors who would talk to you about it. And if you ever wanted to visit, Tom, you'd be more than welcome. It's a genuinely it's been quite a remarkable journey, and I think staff would tell you this too. It was a school that felt like it had very little hope because it had an attendance figure of 80%. It has been a school of concern. It was caught up in the WCAT scandal. It's a series of different buildings that don't look particularly well loved. It was well known for being a very dangerous school, a very difficult school to work in. It had a reputation, shall we say. Now, that isn't the case now. Children are courteous, they're polite. They're incredibly polite, actually. They'll walk on single file in the left in almost near silence. Lessons are almost silent. Children are really happy to be there.
Is that a good thing, David? Is that silence a good thing? Because, to sort of bring this into the conversation, and again, you don't need to comment on this, but, members of the NASUWT at another school in Astria, as you'll know this, they went on strike over the strict behaviour policies. They said that they had an issue with the ensuring of silence in the corridors and classrooms unless pupils were given permission to talk. And NASUWT, which, to be fair, is probably, quite sort of, I would say it backs generally sort of stuff when it comes to behaviour. It tends to take the line of sort of trying to support teachers and groups of teachers when it comes to behaviour and trying to get it better. But the union in this case said that the policies were heavy-handed, and that they weren't allowing the teachers to manage behaviour fairly or proportionately. But do you feel that is the case where you are?
Where we are, there was no choice but to improve behaviour. Staff would have their doors locked in their PPA and would often not have PPA because children would just be running around the school. You might be talking about 70 to 100 children running around the corridors, not going to lessons, sometimes climbing on the roof. The fact that you would then have a corridor where you say good morning, good afternoon, I like you, I think you're looking smart today, how was your swimming competition? That's the type of quiet we're talking about, where children are actually able to have that warmth, that check-in, that experience of courtesy and someone caring on every interaction as they walk down the corridors, while being free from the pushing, the shoving, the harassment, the bullying, which is just about disappeared. It could always happen in our school. There could always be a problem, but actually it's a courteous place to be. And that's the benefit of what those rules bring. This structure is bringing freedom. These the increase in the improvements in behaviour is genuinely life-changing. Children who were just running around corridors now sat in, able to recite Shakespeare. It's genuinely transformational. Now, I don't know how I can convince your listeners apart from saying it, but we've had Tom Bennett come and say top 10% of behaviour in schools I've seen. That was from Tom Bennett. Ofsted said improving quickly. If you look at our attendance, it's up. If you look at our suspensions, they're down. If you look at our Progress 8, it's the most improved in the city. So there's lots of hard measures, but actually our visitors say this is something quite special. But if you ask the kids, they're delighted. And the ones that perhaps want to challenge a little bit more, they're sort of a bit conflicted. They'll go, yeah, I don't like the rules, but actually it's better now we have the rules than before we did. So, proof's in the pudding, really.
Yeah, I mean, what would you say to those who would sort of argue that it's all very robotic, it's all very sort of factory system, the kids in lines and everybody, doing what they're, it's almost like all the ants marching sort of thing. What would you say to that criticism, that it's sort of, it might kill the individuality, if you like, from the students? I mean, you're saying, and also there's those who would say, well, if it's scripted, if everything's scripted, even the politeness, then is it real? Is it just almost like rehearsing for a play every day? If that makes sense.
Yeah,
that's not me saying that.
No, I know that.
I'm just presenting the arguments that you will get.
I would just say that that's not my lived experience of school. Yeah, there's lots of structure and order, but I'd suggest that given the way I've talked about the school, that's what it needed. But also to say that genuinely, when I started, I didn't experience a large degree of courtesy, off-the-cuff conversations with children. But they've just been at PGL for the weekend. Apparently, they've got very good at throwing axes, which we either should be really happy about or really worried about. But they've brought me back little gifts. I've got this bendy pink man with my initials on the back, because we have pink everything. And it's genuinely like a nice interaction you have with children. And when you are talking to them, it's about something really nice or what they want to talk to you about. But that couldn't happen in the chaos. I'd have no time to talk to anybody in the chaos. But we don't have that then.
Yeah, if anyone's just joining the conversation, David is referring to Clipboard Gate, which was where David bought lots of pink clipboards, and the teachers in the school use a technique called active observation, where, well, you say, David, again, succinctly, they observe the things that's happening in the classroom and they write it down, basically, isn't it, in a nutshell? Yeah. So that was Clipboard Gate. You missed that bit if you're just joining now. I'm sorry. Listen back about Clipboard Gate. It was at the beginning. I wanted to ask you, like, how do you go about? Because you've mentioned this, you believe there's been this big change. You've talked about how you think that. So let me dig into that change then. If you had to succinctly say, what are the things that drove that change?
Mm-hmm.
What did you actually do in terms of policies, right? Because it's very easy to say it changed, right? And I've already said there'll be those who would argue, well, it doesn't matter who visits, because anyone can visit for 3 hours and see beautiful things, and whether that's Ofsted or anyone else. So that's what people might say about that. They might say, well, so what? Some people might say, well, the results of a school don't necessarily reflect behavior or culture or attitudes or happiness and all the other things. There'll be arguments against all of those things. So what I'm saying is, what I'm asking you next is, let's say that change has happened. What were the key drivers? What were the key things? Tell me.
I think you've got to start and build credibility by winning something. In that case, it was, I just got sick of the fact they're wearing coats indoors. So no coats indoors. Within about 2 or 3 days, there were very, very few coats indoors. But it gave everyone on the senior team, I think, a sense that actually we can win this. This is winnable because there's coats off indoors. And then it was walk on the left. Let's all walk on the left. And the vast majority of kids were walking on the left. And I think that there's a failure to understand that children don't really know stuff outside their educational experience in the school setting you've got. It's not like they think like we do and go, oh, Michaela this, and what about School 21 that? It's not, they don't have that conception at all. They just go to school. That's their conception. So when you say, actually, this is what we stand for and this is not okay and this is okay and this is what we want, the vast majority of children will go with you, especially if when you say it, you mean it. And so then that's the other thing I'd say. Two really important things: courtesy and certainty. So often people talk about warm, strict, but I think that's got overdone and sometimes the message lost here and there. So I like to talk about courtesy and certainty. So we're courteous and we're polite to one another, but there's a certainty to our actions. When we say this is going to happen, that is what's going to happen. Now, that gives a boundary. Children need to understand boundaries that they can operate safely in. And in fact, children are crying out to us to have those boundaries for them so that they can feel safe, and sometimes so they can push against them. It's the boundary that us adults need to put in place for them, for their safety, for their security. But by giving that courtesy, by giving that certainty, it started to make the world a difference. And then it was just on one hill to the next hill. We've done this, so now let's do uniform. So we did uniform. And then the culture started to look different. The school started to look different. And at the same time as you're doing all of this with student behaviour, you're also working on lessons, and a lot of great work being done in teaching and learning. And a big shout out to Julie Atkins, who I know is listening. Did a huge amount of work, meaning that classrooms were disruption free, and that staff had those structures that I talked about, so that when you go from lesson to lesson, children experience the house style. So you make the best use of your time in lessons, and then you're just trying to make things more and more efficient. You talked about, walking in lines everywhere. Well, changeovers used to take 15 minutes, so children wouldn't ever get to lesson. But by having a lineup, they get to lesson now within about 2 minutes.
Can I ask you, Dave, you're touching, sort of circling back a bit, but on the same sort of issue of this idea of trying to turn around things. You said you had your ribs broken.
Fractured.
So how did that happen then? And what was you? Yeah, go on.
I was just a child decided to punch me in the ribs, and I didn't think anything of it. But then I struggled to breathe. It was hard to move. All of the rest.
And why did they? Are you allowed to tell me why they did that?
Just some things children do, and as I say, it was a chaotic school. Corridors were very, very difficult. It was known as a difficult school, and when I'd said on the BBC pushing and shoving, I also mean stuff like that. So the crises in schools like that are also about staffing and recruitment and retention. You need great staff, the best staff, to work in that type of school, and we have a great staff body. But try recruiting a maths teacher in a school like that. So my social media presence was pretty much determined by the fact that I wanted to be able to recruit people to the school, and I really wanted to be able to say to everyone who will listen, look, we're under new management and things are different now. And without that social media presence, we wouldn't be able to have got the transformation that we've been able to do. And of course, it's still ongoing and it's not finished. And to be honest, the way I am, it probably never will be. But you needed that to break out of it. A school that is under PAN, under pupil admission number, in a challenging circumstance, Ofsted inadequate, is going to struggle to move and struggle to get the right people in there. So you're fighting against quite a lot to get that turned around, and so it does require a lot of determination and a great team here we have.
Yeah, you mentioned Ofsted. They said last year that Astria is strong and improving, but exclusions remain too high, in inverted commas. So to presumably sort of, how is that side of it going? To be sort of more general, have you had to take a lot of action, David? I know there was a sort of infamous interview over the weekend where I think it was in Scotland. I don't actually know who was being interviewed, but they were asked. It was somebody to do with the Scottish government, I think, and they were being asked, would you exclude a child who punched a pregnant woman in the stomach? And she sort of couldn't answer that question, really. So I'll ask you, if one of your students punched a member of staff, is there a stock response to that?
We would take the strongest action based on the scenario that we could possibly take. Yes, we would suspend. Yes, we consider permanent exclusion. We shouldn't be doing that type of thing. If you go into a hospital, you'll see a sign that says, do not abuse our staff. You'll see the same on the train. You'll see that in shops nowadays as well. Why should schools be any different? There should be a culture of courtesy and respect. We have a code of conduct. I've done a podcast about it. Not my most controversial podcast recently, but it's out there. Now, in terms of
are your rates of exclusion too high?
Yeah, and they're reducing. So they're significantly reduced, and they'll continue to reduce. And that's come about because we teach children how to behave. We have half-termly visioning mornings where we say this is what we do and why. We have reboarding. We have just about every intervention under the sun, uses of external agencies, our own internal alternative provision. We do all of these different things to support and prevent suspension and exclusion, because that is the last resort, and that is not what we want to be doing. We want children to be learning and in classrooms. But the thing is that you also have to draw a line somewhere, and this is sometimes the safest and most appropriate thing to do at times. And that is why the law exists, for principals and schools to be able to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that you mentioned school attendance earlier, and I've just had Katie on there who was talking about she's a home educator, so we were talking about that for the first half of the show, and I mean, do you think that school attendance is as important as it was before the pandemic, for example?
I'll tell you what I think's happened. I think that the social contract got rewritten at a time when there were parties in Downing Street, and it happened in a way that's not going to support education and isn't going to support the civic responsibilities that we want to develop. And so that social contract needs redrawing and rebalancing. You are not going to get people who can profess British values like the rule of law, or be able to promote liberal values if they haven't had a great education in which they can read proficiently and write well, and are mathematically capable. And that only happens when they attend school, and a great school. So that social contract needs rewriting, because our institutions need improvements in strength. And that improvement in strength is partly reflected in this attendance issue. Now, that is low, partly because things like mental health services have essentially seen their funding decreased quite considerably, but also people like social care, the police, other services that work with schools don't have the funding and strength that they once had. And also schools need to be supported in this work to rebalance that social contract. That means stronger public institutions, and schools need support to do it. So attendance is vital. It is very much down on where it was pre-pandemic. Schools up and down the country are struggling with that. And yes, we're struggling too, but the situation is improving, just very slowly. So it's going to take a large number of years to get to where the pre-pandemic levels were.
What do you do when it comes to attendance? You've said it's important. I mean, what are the things you're doing to try and, if you think it's important, what do you do about it?
I think attendance on the level of an individual family can be quite complex, can't it? Because in some cases it can just be about incentivization, and a lot of schools would have rewards and nudges and pushes and positive messages here and there. And on the other side, there are things like enforcements and things like that. But what we do in between is everything ranging from safeguarding work to make sure that people have the right support to help their children in the situations they may have. There may be vulnerabilities, and we do that safeguarding work. It might be school anxiety, school refusal, and in our school's case, just to be totally upfront, it's a lack of trust in our ability to do the job we're meant to do. I've mentioned the history of the school. So we've got to build that trust. We've also got to work with families on whatever the issue might be. whether that's through safeguarding, pastoral, or SEND. But then also, we've just got to raise this profile. We've also got a minibus that does the rounds. We've got a fantastic attendance team who'll knock on doors, who'll make the phone calls, and who'll be relentless. But we've got to build a culture of attendance. And in our school, that's from a culture of attend when you want, if you want. That's the scale of the challenge we've got to do. And I know it's not just us. I know that's up and down the country, but it's a crucial piece of work that schools need external support with and can't do alone.
You mentioned about the reading and writing there. Surely, though, that could be done in home education. Surely, Katie's children who we're just talking about there, they weren't educated at school, and they're sort of, gone off to college, will go off to the world of work. They are flying, probably, academically, from what she was implying.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of home educators, as it would happen, and they are really wonderful people doing great jobs with their children. And those children are really bright, smart, wonderful, passionate, caring, lovely people who I'm sure will go on to do those things. However, if I just refer you to some of the types of home education cases that some people listening to this will be dealing with, or indeed we might be dealing with, it's parents who wouldn't always be capable of that, removing their child from formal schooling, usually because of something they don't like about formal schooling. That's the thing that I am seeing more often than not. And so I do not believe, I'm afraid, that all of those homeschooling experiences are equal. I think there are going to be some children who are not learning an awful lot, and in fact are then behind with their studies. And also, it's then very hard to maintain that safeguarding relationship and keep children safe. And as I mentioned, there's a social contract that needs to be redrawn in some of these communities. And that isn't going to happen when people opt out of the medicine, even if the medicine isn't what they want to have.
It sounds as though you've introduced a lot of, you've really gone for a big change, right? So when it comes to the staff, what changes have you made, if any, when it comes to accountability for staff and expectations of staff, as you've come into the school? Not just you, perhaps it's part of a wider change, but what, have there been any changes in that respect?
So just firstly, I don't believe in formal high stakes lesson observations, me walking around and appearing menacing. If I am at all talking to staff, it's mainly to give praise, encouragement, or little changes that they can make. We call it no stakes feedback. There isn't that type of culture. It's an open door policy where you can walk into any SLT lesson, you can walk into anybody else's lesson, and what we want to do is celebrate and raise up everyone. I think that with teaching staff, at least, really the best job we can do is reduce workload, increase simplicity, so that the job becomes much easier. You'll know that there's a recruitment crisis, and a recruitment crisis that will get worse. Teaching in our school, you don't have to stay up all night planning your own lessons. The lessons are planned as a group, and if you were to join our school, they're already there. Your job is to make that relevant, prepare for it, know how to deliver it. In terms of routines, learn the routines and they'll run themselves, because the children do that everywhere in school, across the curriculum. There's no marking to take home. You don't have to take home piles of books. All of these things reduce workload and make it easier and nicer and more pleasant to be a teacher, especially when behaviour is good in the school. Where I'd say a lot more rigour has come in, it's more in the pastoral side, the leadership side, and increasingly with curriculum leaders, where we are doing a lot of intensive curriculum work, which is hard, difficult, intellectually rigorous, but rewarding. But for senior leaders, you'll have seen pictures I'll have put on social media about how we run the day, how we know where everyone is all the time, how we hold each other accountable. And I think those systems where pastoral and senior team can do that just means that teachers can teach, leaders can lead. And if you want to be a leader, you're going to have to work really hard. Of course you are. But if you're a member of staff, then a member of teaching staff, then you can have great subject knowledge, be passionate about working with children, but you can prepare for your individual lessons, but not lose your life to a job that shouldn't take that from you. And that's the benefit of the school model we're promoting.
Yeah. Do you think that also going back to the and I know this isn't your school, but it's obviously within the same sort of trust, but within that strike action by NAS in another school, just to be clear, it's not your school. But one of the things that did come up there was the staff dress code. Do you have a staff dress code?
We do have staff dress code.
You love all these questions, David, don't you? They're great.
Yeah, it's not a problem for me. I just think a lot of trusts do have that. I'm sure there are trusts that don't, but there are also lots of trusts that do. But also, you're in an area where perhaps there's an aversion to school uniform, and you're asking children to dress in a certain way and hold them accountable to the top button being done up, to wearing black leather polishable shoes, shirts being tucked in, which might seem archaic to a lot of people in workplaces nowadays. But if that is what you're asking of children, children do get quite annoyed when staff waltz in and look like they don't give the same level of care to their outfit. I mean, we have there's some.
What does that look like, though, in practice? Give me some tangible examples here of the staff dress code. Of the things.
Yeah, shirt and tie, a suit, tailored trousers, a jacket if you're walking around corridors, jacket removed if you're in the classroom, that type of thing. Something that looks business-like for those that want to dress in female attire, that type of thing.
So when you say jacket, jacket in the corridor and then removed in the classroom?
Yeah, you might want to. You might be more animated in the classroom. You might it might be warmer in the classroom. So it allows teachers to feel a little bit more comfortable. But in the corridors, we ask children to wear blazers. So it's important to be consistent.
Got you. So imagine I'm a member of staff. If I sort of was wearing, if I didn't have a blazer on in the corridor and then had a blazer on in the classroom, would you speak to me about that?
Yeah, because the children would pick the staff member up. You have to remember that children really have a strong sense of fairness. And there's this sort of myth that sort of I might be, or people in my position might be, these characters that just sort of make diktats from an office quite a long way away from the action. If I'm walking down the corridor and the staff member isn't wearing their jacket, then a student's probably going to take me aside and say, he's not wearing his jacket. What are you going to do about it? So it's a self-policing system. Now, that's not to say that there can't be different rules for adults from children, but it is to say that there is an innate sense of fairness. And if there is a difference, then you need to explain why that difference is, because I want to give the sense that we're all one team. This isn't Mr. Scales and his school. This is one team of staff and children working to get to university or a real alternative.
But again, just to come back on that is, do you think some teachers, I'm sure, would say, and I'm guessing your answer, I know what your answer to this is going to be, is that that's your way of doing things, which I think is fair enough. And if people don't like it, don't sort of get a job there in a way. But there will be those teachers who would say that is, as an adult, as a professional, in a way, demeaning, or it's not sort of, I mean, okay, if they're coming in a clown outfit, dressed as a clown with a little squirter and going up to the kids and sort of, doing magic tricks, that's like, but I guess there'd be many who would say that's petty, is sort of a jacket on, jacket off in the classroom, in the corridor. Does that really matter as a professional? There'll be those who would argue that, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. And I understand. I think I would probably take a view like what you've described, Tom, but also just to say there are many workplaces that have expectations around how you dress. You know, whether that is a top investment banking firm or whether that's a doctor's, in an operating theatre, or whether
Or
it's
football clubs.
McDonald's or whatever. People have uniforms. Now, we're in a situation, however anachronistic you decide it is, listening to this, where children wear uniforms, and in the case of our school, there is a need for a social leveller of a uniform, because the discrepancies that are visible in terms of social difference really affected children's attendance, their sense of self, to the extent that when we did buy everybody a school uniform, they were just delighted, funny as it may sound. They thought they looked smart. They felt proud of how they looked and the school that they were in. Now, if on one hand, I say that this is necessary for children, but teachers rock up in jeans, shirts untucked, they are going to find a difference there, and it's going to be difficult for them to reconcile that difference. So it's the nature of our context, and it is where we are as a school at the moment. Now, there are some schools that have no school uniform. There are some schools that don't have any staff dress code. But to work with these children at this place at this time, that is what is required. And if you are passionate about disadvantage as much as I am, and you see that this school is where that's best addressed, then that's the dress code.
Listen, David, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for answering all of my questions. And sort of, and we've got through quite a lot there. I just want to give a massive final shout out to our sponsor tonight, which is John Catt Educational. If you want to get yourself a professional development book, then head over to johncattbookshop.com and get yourself any book on the John Catt website with 20% off using the code JCTTR2324. And we always give a massive shout out to John Catt just for supporting us at Teachers Talk Radio and really enabling us to do more of what we already do, which is leading the education conversation. So thank you ever so much. And a huge thank you, David, for giving up the time. I know you're going to be incredibly busy as a head teacher. And one thing I will say, whether people agree or disagree with you or your approach, nobody can really doubt your passion and your wanting to do the job you're doing, which in the current circumstances in any school is going to be a difficult one. So thank you for coming on and sharing your points of view.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers, David. Thank you. Bye bye. So that was David Scales, head teacher. I hope you found that conversation interesting. I will be back tomorrow night, actually, with Lucy. We are hosting a show with Spelling Shed. You can find out more information about that on Lucy's Twitter, which is LouAlise1989. So if you want to follow her and find out a bit more, you can do that. That'll be tomorrow, same place, 7:30 p.m. on Spaces at TTR. So we're looking specifically at how to teach spelling effectively. So if you teach literacy in any level or form in your school, then this is going to be the one. And it's going to be about how to teach spelling effectively. So definitely check that out. It's tomorrow, 7:30 p.m, same place, TTR on Spaces. A huge thanks to everyone who's listened along, but particularly to Nathan behind the scenes, who is administrating the space. So huge thanks to Nathan for doing that. And for everybody from the team TTR, Tom, Lucy, and everybody else who's been listening as well. And the biggest thanks to all the listeners who are listening to this live, but also anybody who will be listening to it back as a podcast. Thanks for getting through to the end. As always, we appreciate it. See you now and have a good evening.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.